Long before she opened her eyes, the servants whispered that her life had already been written. She was more inbred than a child born from a brother and a sister. It is with this chilling sentence that the story of Helena Aurelia begins. A young princess born in the heart of the splendor of the Lysaurian court, yet carrying within her the silent weight of a century of marriages between uncles, nieces, cousins upon cousins. In the gilded corridors of the Celestine Palace, her birth was celebrated as a sign of dynastic continuity. Without imagining that this fragile child would become the very symbol of an empire rotting from within. It is said that while watching her sleep, some servants whispered that her life had been written long before she entered the world. For Helena Aurelia was not only an heiress, she was the ultimate product of a bloodline obsessed with purity, a lineage ready to do anything to preserve its crown, even at the price of the health and future of its own children. And yet, amid this genetic darkness, the little girl seemed luminous. Her eyes shone with a gentle intelligence. Her health astonished the doctors. People began to believe that she had escaped the curse that had struck so many before her. But history, cruel and patient, was waiting for its moment. As soon as she entered adolescence, the eyes of Europe's sovereigns turned toward her. In her blood lay the keys to 2 empires, and an implacable destiny was already preparing its trap. For when she blew out her 16 candles, Helena Aurelia would learn that her future was not a path but a sentence. She would be promised to a man who should never have been her husband, but who was, in reality, her own uncle. Long before Helena Aurelia was born, her fate had been sealed in the carefully preserved registers of the House of Valeburg. For generations, the family had chosen to preserve its power through marriage, not by seeking distant alliances, but by closing their circle upon itself. Uncles married nieces, aunts married nephews. First cousins were joined as though it were nothing more than a family custom. For ordinary people, such unions would have seemed unthinkable. For the Valeburgs, they were a political tool. These marriages, repeated relentlessly for more than a century, shaped a family tree whose branches never strayed far from the trunk. With every generation, the same equation repeated itself. Marry a close relative to preserve a kingdom, a crown, an empire. But as the years passed, this calculation proved far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The blood, perpetually mixed with the same origins, weakened, diseases spread, weaknesses multiplied. Some children were born so fragile that they survived no more than a few hours. When Helena Aurelia was conceived, the degree of inbreeding had reached a level that few European families would have considered bearable. Modern doctors would say she was more inbred than a child born of a brother-sister or father-daughter union. It was the mathematical result of repeated political decisions, of an obsession with maintaining the purity of royal blood, an obsession that had become a genetic prison. And yet none of this had been explained to the child who would soon enter the world. For her, tragedy had no face yet. But across Europe, the whispers had already begun. Ambassadors and courtiers murmured that the future princess would carry the weight of her ancestors' errors. Some even claimed that nature would one day take revenge on this defiance of its laws. Thus, even before her first cry, Helena Aurelia was surrounded by dark prophecies. Her existence seemed written in ink too heavy, as though life itself hesitated to carve a path through such a damaged heritage. Against all expectations, when Helena Aurelia came into the world on a cold January morning, she breathed with a calm strength that surprised even the palace physicians. Her cries, hesitant at first, became clear and full, as though life, despite the chains of her blood, had decided to cling to her with unexpected tenacity. It is said that the midwives looked at one another in silence, troubled by a vigor they had not expected. In a family where so many children were born weak, where some survived only a few hours, the arrival of this almost too perfect infant seemed miraculous. She grew thus frail but resilient, like a flame dancing amid the wind without ever going out. The cautious doctors observed her every movement, searching for signs of hidden weakness. But the little princess defied all their predictions. She walked early, spoke gently, placed her small hands on prayer books as though she already wished to understand the world. Around her, the murmurs slowly changed in tone. Some saw in her a sign of destiny, others a challenge to the curse that hovered over the Valeburgs. Yet if Helena Aurelia was strong of body, her soul carried a melancholy already visible in her gaze. She seemed to listen more than she spoke, observe more than she laughed. While other children ran through the palace winter gardens, she preferred to follow birds with her eyes or place her fingers on the stained glass windows of the chapel. It is said she once asked her governess, "Why am I here and not elsewhere?" A question too heavy for a child, but one that revealed the early depth of her mind. The ladies of the court described her as a small silent star, bright and sad at once. Her presence soothed, yet her silence unsettled. There was in her a kind of intuition, an obscure awareness that she was walking on a tightrope stretched above an abyss whose shape she did not yet know. And in this fragile light that never went out, the truth began to take shape. Helena Aurelia was not just a survivor of her lineage. She was the last breath of hope for a doomed family. At barely 16, while other young girls timidly discovered the taste of freedom, Helena Aurelia learned that it would never exist for her. It was in the midst of a muffled conversation in a salon scented with wax and old wood that she first heard the whispered name of her future husband. A cold silence tightened her throat. King Ulrich IV of Arvenden, her uncle. A man she knew only through somber portraits, medical rumors, and the prayers whispered across Europe for his survival. It was said he walked with difficulty, that his deformed jaw made speech painful, that his thoughts sometimes drifted into a childhood fog that had never lifted. Mothers whispered that even the nurses feared his wavering gaze, and this was the man the crown intended for her. When the news was confirmed, Helena Aurelia felt a heaviness descend upon her like a living shadow. She did not protest. She had been raised to obey, to serve the dynasty. But one question burned silently in her heart. How could this be called a marriage, a duty, a sacrifice, or a condemnation? The corridors of the Celestine Palace, once familiar, suddenly became foreign, as though each tapestry murmured a destiny she did not want. Preparations began at once. Fabrics were embroidered, letters drafted, dates set. As the days passed, Helena Aurelia felt the air grow thinner around her. At night, she remained awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, wondering about the life being imposed upon her. Was she born to be an offering, a mere political remedy for a king's fragility? When they finally showed her the official portrait of her uncle, her future husband, she did not look away. Instead, she observed the suffering etched into his face, as if searching for the truth of her own future. And in his fixed, exhausted gaze, she believed she saw a distress similar to her own. Perhaps they were both prisoners of an inheritance that allowed them no choices. In that moment, she understood that destiny had tightened its chains and, in the silence of the palace, her still young heart learned what resignation meant. The marriage of Helena Aurelia was never a union, but a fragile performance upheld by the courts of Europe, which desperately hoped for an heir to save a crumbling empire. From the moment she arrived in Arvenden city, she understood that her new life would be made of dark corridors, freezing chambers, and looks filled with pity. The great and silent Alcazar of Arvenden seemed to breathe with difficulty, like its sick king. Ulrich IV, despite his awkward efforts, could offer the young queen neither tenderness nor support. He lived imprisoned in his own body, his pain, his weaknesses, his endless fatigue. Helena Aurelia, who had hoped to find at least some shared humanity in him, found only the distant echo of a distress no one dared to name. They crossed paths, exchanged formal greetings, and returned to their solitude. Yet duty never failed to remind her of its presence. The court, The priests, the ambassadors all expected from her a miracle that her own lineage made nearly impossible. "Give us an heir," they repeated without saying the words, but with the pressure weighing on every breath she took. So she prayed, she hoped, she tried to believe that life could be born where everything seemed doomed to failure. But destiny struck again. The first time she felt a faint life inside her. Her heart swelled with shy, almost frightened joy. She caressed her belly as one protects a fragile flame. But a few weeks later, that flame went out without warning. The silence that followed was more violent than the pain itself. A second hope came just as brief, and a third. Each loss hollowed her a little more, as though her body itself refused to be the answer Europe demanded. The ladies of the court found her paler, quieter. At night, Helena Aurelia lay awake, hands clasped, wondering what she could offer if even motherhood eluded her. In the palace's dry gardens, she walked alone, feeling the weight of the curse that had followed her since birth. She was no longer just the princess born of Valeburg incest. She was becoming the woman history, condemned to never fulfill the role for which she had been sacrificed. After so many years of silent tears and broken hopes, no one dared believe that life could still find a way through Helena Aurelia's fragile body. Even she prayed without truly believing, as though her words rose toward a sky that no longer listened. But in the heart of this winter of uncertainty, a new tremor ran through her timid, almost unreal. The doctors confirmed what she had not dared to imagine. A child was growing inside her. This time, she said nothing. No cry of joy. No triumphant words. She simply placed her hands on her belly and breathed deeply, sealing the fragile secret within her heart. Her ladies in waiting, accustomed to her silences, watched her with worry, tinged by hope. They saw her gaze soften, grow deeper, almost luminous. Helena Aurelia, who had suffered so much, seemed to regain a part of herself. As the months passed, the entire court held its breath. Even Ulrich IV, with his usual awkwardness, tried to be present, aware perhaps for the first time of what this child meant for his kingdom and for his own soul. Prayers across Arvinen became more fervent. Churches filled with candles. The entire empire hung on a life still invisible. Then came the dreaded day, in a room lit by trembling candles. Helena Aurelia struggled for hours, pale, lips tightened. And when at last a baby's cry tore through the silence, a breath of life crossed the palace. A boy, an heir. She held him close, marveling at his warmth, his tiny fingers, the softness of his breath against her skin. It all seemed so miraculous, she feared opening her eyes, afraid it might vanish. It is said that for the first time since her arrival in Arvindon, she smiled a fragile, trembling, but real smile. The entire kingdom celebrated the newborn. Bells rang, masses were held. Foreign envoys wrote letters filled with hope. But at the heart of this collective joy, Helena Aurelia knew that only time would tell whether this miracle was her salvation or her last ray of light. The joy that illuminated the birth of the little heir did not last long in the life already too short of Helena Aurelia. Within weeks, her body showed signs of exhaustion that doctors tried to ignore. She who had prayed so desperately to give life, now found herself prisoner of a dull fever, of a weakness that tightened around her breath day after day. Whispers in the palace became muffled prayers. Everyone knew without wanting to admit it, that the young queen was fading. Helena Aurelia, however, remained almost ethereally gentle. From her bed she asked for her son. She looked at him for long moments, as if trying to engrave his face into the world's memory. It is said she whispered words to him in her childhood language, tender phrases no courtier understood, but which made her eyes shine with a peaceful light. She never spoke of pain, only of love, and the silent wish that her child might one day escape the chains imposed on him at birth. But 17th century medicine could do nothing against the infection consuming her body. The remedies they administered, infusions, prayers, offered only brief comfort. The fever rose, her breath shortened, and nights became a long trembling between hope and resignation. As Christmas Eve of 1692 approached, rumor turned to dread. The bells of Arvindin city seemed to ring more slowly, as though the whole city held its breath. On the icy night of December 24th, as hymns echoed through churches, Helena Aurelia exhaled her last breath at only 23 years old. Her hand, it is said, rested near her son's cradle, as though even death had not dared sever that final bond. The news of her passing plunged Europe into heavy silence. She had been the only fragile glimmer of a broken dynasty. Her death signaled troubled times ahead, and, as they prepared a queen's funeral, a deeper unease spread. What would become of the kingdom now that its last hope had vanished? After Helena Aurelia's death, a strange clarity fell upon Europe, as though her disappearance suddenly revealed the fragility of a world thought eternal. In the courts of Arvindin city, Paris, her name was spoken with compassion and regret. She had lived only 23 years, but her departure left a breach none had foreseen. Her son, Adrian Lysander, instantly became the center of all hopes. He was seen as the promise of reconciliation between the two. Valeburg branches a near miraculous solution to prevent the war looming ahead. Some even claimed that had Helena Aurelia survived, she might have played a decisive role of vigilant mother, a woman of peace, a key figure in a fragile European balance. But history grants no second chances, and destiny, already cruel to the mother, soon struck the child. A few years after his birth, Adrian Lysander was taken by illness. A breath too short, a fever too high, and hope vanished as quickly as it had come. With his death collapsed the last possibility of uniting the kingdoms without violence, and Europe plunged into conflict. Powers tore at one another over the Arvindin succession. Armies marched, cities burned, and for long years, war reshaped the continent's borders. Much later, people murmured that if Helena Aurelia or her son had survived, this storm might have been avoided. Today, in history books, her name appears like a delicate, almost erased shadow. But for those who take the time to listen to the echoes of the past, Helena Aurelia embodies this poignant truth. Sometimes, the fate of entire continents rests in the hands of a young woman whom history did not allow to live. Her story reveals several painful truths. Sometimes the fate of nations rests on the shoulders of someone no one truly protects. The most silent sacrifices rarely make it into history books. And power, when placed above humanity, always demands a devastating price. What do you think about this story? Leave a comment for everyone to know. And now, let's listen to the next story.